Okay, today is June 24th in the year 2011. I'm Karen Herman with the Archive of American Television, and it is my great pleasure today to be interviewing Tom Azzari at his home in Taos, New Mexico. Okay, so we're going to start right from the beginning, Tom. And our first question is, what was your name at birth?
Elizabeth Taylor. But that was taken, so I had to change it to Thomas Eugene Azzari.
What names were you credited with in your career?
I took my credit as THO period, Tho E Azzari. And that's how I took my credit all these years for some reason. I have no idea how I abbreviated the Thomas to THO.
And that's what it always was?
Always been.
When were you born?
August 30th, 1940.
And where?
The Bronx, New York.
Is that where you grew up?
Until I was 11 years old. Then we moved to Mount Vernon. And from Mount Vernon, I went to junior high school in Mount Vernon, Nichols Junior High. And then my family moved to Yorktown Heights, New York. So I went to school at Yorktown Heights High School.
And what was your father's name?
Almo, A-L-M-O.
What did he do?
He worked in the milk industry for 35 years.
And your mother, her name?
Aline, A-L-E-I-N. She spelled it kind of weird. And she was a dental assistant before they got married.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
One brother, 5 years younger, Kenneth Almo.
He was also in the business.
He was in the business. He left the business and went back into education. We worked on several projects together. And he went back and got his master's degree and went into teaching art and then became an administrator in the school district in Apple Valley, California.
What traits do you think you inherited from your parents?
Besides my good looks, well, my father was a mechanic. He could do anything. So I worked a lot with him. He always had a second job. We put roofs on, TV antennas, storm windows, a whole bunch of stuff. He always, very hard-working guy, because he always tried to upgrade our standard of living, from the Bronx to Mount Vernon to Yorktown, which is a big thing. And he purchased his first house in Yorktown Heights. God, that was in the 50s. I was just starting my sophomore year at Yorktown. Sense of humor.
Anything from your mother?
That was from my mother also, yeah.
What were your interests growing up?
Interest. Sports. I went to a small high school, so I could participate in a lot of school sports, which was nice. That's about it, I think. I'm really not sure what my interests were. I always had a job. I was always working. So, friends, party, like most kids in high school or whatever.
Did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
No, I had no idea. I wasn't a very good student in high school. I was dyslexic, and it was not. Schoolwork was not one of my high priorities at that point.
Did you know you were dyslexic?
No, I didn't find out until I was 25, actually, which was kind of weird. But you overcome.
When was the first time that you saw television?
1949. My parents bought their first television. We were living in the Bronx. We had a little 9-inch GE, like we're the first guys on the block. They had a television, which was kind of cool. A lot of test pattern, a lot of, I can't remember the shows that were on. I'm not sure. Howdy Doody. Yeah, I think we watched Howdy Doody. Interesting connection later on, too, when I was in college. One of my roommates' fathers designed and built the doll Howdy Doody, which I thought was interesting.
Did you meet him?
Who?
The
No, I did
father?
not. No, he had passed away at that time, I think.
Talk a little bit about your influences in terms of, were you interested in art or design at all?
Yeah, very much. I mean, I always excelled in art in high school. I mean, that was my basic subject. Even when I took the SATs or whatever it was in that equivalent in those times, I did very poorly on everything else, but on the certain section, I scored like 98, 99. And even they had told me that a good career path would have been a draftsman.
Did you attend college?
Yes, I went to University of Bridgeport in Connecticut, studying industrial design, and it had a great influence on my the way I design sets. Being an industrial designer, and you approach problems differently than as opposed to going to study theater arts and going into the TV and film business. One of my heroes was Raymond Loewy. Raymond Loewy. He was the father of industrial design. And one quote that really sticks in my head is, I was never afraid to fail to achieve something large.
Is that something that you learned early on?
Yeah, if you study industrial design, in the late 50s, I mean, he was very prominent and designed many things, all kinds of things, toasters to Air Force One, many cars, planes, all kinds of stuff. Yeah, so it's a good design background to have, is industrial design.
Now, how did you choose industrial design?
Because of my tests that I had, going out of high school and trying to get into a college. I was advised not to. My high school counselor, when I went and told her I wanted to go to college, laughed at me, and said, "There's no way." So I think that's what motivated me to apply to a junior college. Got accepted, then I applied to a 4-year college, and got accepted there. I took dummy English maybe, but I still excelled in the art end of it, in design.
And what did you do once you left college?
Well, I went to L.A. I only did 2 years at University of Bridgeport. And, of course, if you're studying industrial design, the ultimate school to attend would be Art Center in California. So, of course, I wanted to go to Art Center. So that's what motivated my move to California.
And talk about that once you got there, how that led to your career.
Arriving in California in 1961, or summer of 61, I arrived there with a friend of mine, classmate, Gary Blauvelt at the time. We went to California together, and a connection, I think, through Gary's mother, who knew Ed Gale, who worked at CBS. I think we lived on 230th, and I think he was brought up on 229th. That was kind of a weird connection. And we had no intention of becoming, going into this business at all. Gary got a job at CBS through Ed Gale in the film department, and then later worked for my wife's sister, Wendy Blair. And I got a job in the purchasing department. That's the interesting thing about my job in the purchasing department was that I got to learn the mechanics of a television studio, CBS Studio Center, CBS Television City. And I was there for a couple of years, and it gave me a new an outlook on design and television. Because I got to know every department working in purchasing, got to know a lot of people, people in the art department. One in particular, William Craig Smith, Bill Smith, who was at CBS at the time, and then moved to Studio Center. He was another one of my mentors. So it was a very interesting time.
What exactly did you do in the purchasing department?
Write type purchase orders. Keep track of delivery. I was even in charge of personal purchases just before I left. Anybody in the company who wanted to buy something through the purchasing department would come to me. I would type a purchase order and get them a good deal or whatever from our vendors. And my boss, Russ Raymond, He was a big bear of a guy, and learned a lot from him. He's the one that stopped me from chewing gum, especially like talking on the phone. And I learned a lot in purchasing because I learned, like I said, the mechanics of what a television studio was, how many different departments there were, how many people were involved in production, and it was amazing. And I think that's what really stirred my interest in doing something in the industry, because I still wanted to go to school at Art Center, and I did for 3 semester nights. So I did attend Art Center also, and never did get a degree from Art Center, but my career path changed because of working at Television City.
Talk about that. What was the next step in your career path?
The next step was that through Gary and Wendy Blair, they introduced me to my wife, Holly, which is Wendy's sister, and I met her they arranged a date at the Red Skelton rehearsal, which was a prime thing to attend at TV City at that time. They called it the Dirty Hour because he was incredibly funny, and that was our first introduction, was at the Red Skelton show. During that time, because I was an employee of CBS, the parent company, CBS itself, bought Republic Studios at that time. And they have a policy that promotion within the ranks at CBS, and there was a job listing as administrative assistant in the art department at Studio Center, and Wendy actually made me apply for that job. I was getting a little bit too comfortable in purchasing, so that's where I met Al Heshang. And I got the job as an administrative assistant over there, which was really great. And I was still company at that point. I still worked for CBS. And I did blueprints. I did the first studio map. They were organizing the studio at that time. And I even did a report for the president. I think it was John Reynolds, I think, was the president of CBS at that time, Studio Center. And I did a report about what the different unions did, the structure of a film lot, because they were a TV company going into film. And I learned a lot from that. So I learned the mechanics of a film lot by doing that, so which was very interesting. And one of the primary motivations for my career, actually, is learning what everybody does.
Now, this was through the art department?
Yeah, as an administrative assistant. Right. And I got to know every inch of the studio, of course. I even logged all the offices at that point because it was a brand new place. And in my spare time, I'd draw. And Al noticed that I was drawing a lot and liked the stuff that I was doing, and asked me if I would be interested in becoming a set designer. And I said, yeah, sure. I was a little bit undecided because when you had a job that was guaranteed working for the company, if you become a set designer, you have to join a union. There's no guarantees. You could get laid off or whatever, although it was a big increase in pay at the time. So he gave me tests. He would give me assignments. And obviously, I guess I accomplished them pretty well.
Were they assignments for productions?
No, because he would give me an aerial photograph of a building and say, okay, there's one dimension that we know. The doorway was a 3070 door. Okay, interpret that and you draw the building, knowing from that one dimension. And there again, it was learning mechanics. And I had learned perspective at Art Center, and that was one of the tools I used. And I got the job. At that time, everybody in the union, in the set designer union, had to be working before they would let a new person in. So it was very hard to get into the unions at that point. And the opportunity came at one point because the art department was building and they were doing more shows at CBS. I got to join the union.
What was your first assignment that actually was used in production?
First assignment? Oh, God, Lord knows. I worked on many shows. I can't remember the very, very first one. Gilligan's Island I worked on for a couple of years. Gunsmoke. It was probably Gunsmoke at that point. Gunsmoke. I was the production designer at that at one point because they had moved it from another lot, and that was an interesting set because it was stage 3 over at Studio Center. He took up the entire stage, and it was interiors and exteriors of the street, Dodge, I guess it was called, and it was amazing. It was just everything was all on stage. All the interior sets and all the exterior sets were all on one stage. So we did that for quite a few years.
And what were your assignments? What kind of assignments?
As a set designer, what you would do is do working drawings for sheriff's office or whatever it might be, or a shed or whatever it might be. You would have to make the working drawings so that the people in the production and the construction department could build the set. So what you're doing, basically, you're in training to become an architect. You're learning how to draw. You're learning how to build things. It's all interpretation, of Al's impression of what the set would. He would give me a rough, and that would do a plan and elevations, and so the construction department could build the sets. And that's basically what a set designer does. That's what a function is. He's a draftsman. And set designing and model making, we made a tremendous amount of models. So if we did a new set for a pilot or for a particular show, we would build a model also to sell for the production designer or art director to sell to the director and producers.
Would you actually be making the model yourself?
Yes. Yeah. Made many, many models. Even sculpted things. When we were doing Wild Wild West, William Craig Smith, Bill Smith was production designer at that point. And there was an eagle cannon with a tremendous amount of different kinds of props, and I actually sculpted an eagle that they made this big eagle cannon from. So there's a lot of work in plastiline and making those kind of models, with also foam core and that kind of stuff, to make a presentation model, which I would do many, many of those in the years to come.
Going back to Gunsmoke, what do you think is the most important thing you learned from Al Hashang?
Technique, there's so many things I learned from Al. When I started set designing, I was a pest. I asked a lot of questions. I would even hover when Al was doing a drawing. He put up with, he liked me, and he let me do a lot of things that I think was kind of unusual. We became very, very good friends. So how to present a set, how to interpret it from the script, because it's the designer's interpretation of the written word, basically, and every designer will have a different interpretation, depending on what the action is in the script. I learned many, many things from Al. I can't, pinpoint a specific thing, but he would just lead me in the right direction, always, and give me opportunity to express myself. I guess that was the biggest point, is allowing me to express my design ability, or add things to a set that was needed in 2 days, And I also worked with Joe Jennings, of course. He was on the boards at one point too, and learned a tremendous amount from him. And there was a big Carnegie Tech connection there. Al was Carnegie Tech, and Joe was Carnegie Tech, and that comes up later in my career too. There was a lot of Carnegie Tech connections. So I kind of I got a degree from Carnegie Tech being on the boards with Al for 7 years. Wild Wild West was a very interesting show to work on, and that was where my industrial design background, I think, helped, because he did a lot of special props and all kinds of weird things. Joe and I worked on the steam-powered wheelchair that the villain used, and we made a full-size drawing of that thing. So the time frame was always very, very, very tight, and we spent many, many hours, just getting things drawn so the construction compartment could build these things in a timely manner.
For something like the steam-powered wheelchair, how much direction were you? How much direction were you given going into it?
Well, the description in the script, of course, and then the rough sketch. I'm not sure if Al or Bill Smith was production designer at that time. They would do a sketch, and then what you would have to do is interpret that sketch and literally make a drawing so they could physically build it. Maybe from some wheelchair parts or whatever. So we actually made a full-size drawing of that, which was kind of interesting. It was mainly Joe. I was helping Joe at that particular time. Learned a lot from Jennings.
Now, do these props have to work in any capacity?
Oh, absolutely. And then we go to the special effects department. They all worked. We did tanks with Gatling guns. We did a Victorian spaceship. All these kind of weird props and stuff. It was amazing. It was a lot of fun. Very unusual stuff.
And you mentioned Gilligan's Island. That was one of.
Worked on it for 2 years, and I think that was primarily Bill Smith. A very, very funny guy. He's an incredibly talented man, and a lot of humor. We laughed a lot, and yeah.
What kind of things did you do for Gilligan's Island?
Well, doing a washing machine out of bamboo. Everything was related to the island. Of course, bamboo was the main thing. A lot of hut drawings. There again, special props were a big thing. They had a lagoon over at CBS Studio Center. It was where they did most of their exterior stuff. That was there for years and years, and used it for many shows. Basically that was it with Gilligan's. Well, there's another really good connection too with Gilligan. That I when we moved to California, we met a guy named Bob Wilson, who was a publicist at CBS at the time, and he lived with a singing group in a boarding house called the Wellingtons, and we became very good friends. They were a folk group at the time. George Patterson, Kirby Johnson, and Ed Wade came from Illinois. And they did a lot of stuff for Disney. And we ended up living together. We rented a house together at that point. So that we had this big 10-room house on Fuller. And the interesting connection with the Wellingtons is that they ended up singing the theme song for Gilligan's Island.
Did you happen to run into them at all after the time that you were living in that house?
Oh, we're friends to this day. Oh, yeah. Lifelong friends. Yeah. Well, most of them, George went back and got his degree as a psychologist. Ed went back, got a law degree, has a big law firm, and Kirby had passed away early.
Another show that you worked on was Rawhide.
Yes. Rawhide, great. That was with John Goodman, who is a production designer and a very well-known historian, I think, in Western culture. He was kind of fun to work with. I met a lot of really interesting people as a set, doing set design. I did a couple of features there. Carrie O'Dell, who did With Six You Get Egg Roll, the Doris Day film. Little Big Man, Angelo Graham. I designed the tents for Little Big Man. That was my job. In fact, I have 3 of those tents that I bought from CBS. I still have one of them here, a TP that we designed for that show. I've accumulated a lot of memorabilia over the years too, which is kind of neat. There was a show called Cimarron Strip where we built a whole new Western street at CBS. At that time, CBS Studio Center was known as the Western lot. They did a lot of Roy Rogers, when it was started out as Max Sennett Studio, and then it was, oh God, I can't think of it. They had a bunch of names, but it was known for their westerns, and so there was a lot of western sets back in the back lot, and I got to work with Al designing the Cimarron Strip Street.
Can you describe that street?
Well, it was a western town. Got 15, 16 buildings. It stood there for a long time. And then, of course, westerns were out of favor, and things just changed.
Did you use any kind of historic references to create those?
Oh, always. Tremendous amount of research. Every job you do, is a lot of research involved, and which is the fun part of being an art director, production designer, but also a set designer. Because what you're actually doing is you're learning, no matter what show you do. If you're doing a Victorian show, you're doing a lot of Victorian research. Research is a big part of the job.
What would you use as your sources most of the time?
We had a tremendous library that Al put together at CBS, and it still exists, I believe, too. He bought a tremendous amount of books. Wherever we can get information on the subject that we were interested in. It could be any number of things. Architecture was one thing, with there's planes and trains and all kinds of things. Because in the Wild Wild West, we designed this train, the car that they used, and we worked on that a lot. In fact, Al wrote a book on the Wild Wild West, and several of my drawings are in that book. That was a very interesting and a time where I learned a lot.
And where did you go from there?
Let's see. 7 years on the board, doing a lot of stuff. Then I got an offer. Herman Zimmerman at the Hollywood Video Center was doing Della Reese, and he needed an assistant. And there was a designer that worked at CBS that knew me, and I can't think of his name right now, recommended me to Z. And I got the job with Z. I was the assistant art director on Della Reese for 2 weeks, and then he made me the art director on it because he was very busy. He did a lot of stuff at the Video Center. And
can you describe that show?
Della Reese show. It was, I think, probably the first black interview talk variety show. It was amazing. We had her guests were absolutely incredible. We had one of the best bands in town. Tony Bennett came on for scale just to sing with the band. We had Bette Midler. Before all these people were really well known. Woody Allen, a tremendous amount of people on that show. And it was Woody Frazier that produced that show. Rocco Obishi and I think Peter Calabrese designed. And these are all people that will come up later in my career. And we did, I think, 7 90-minute shows a week. It was an incredible schedule.
Can you talk about the sets themselves?
The sets in Della Reese, they had a talk section that we designed like every other week, that I would go and pick out props, because I did the propping and decorating on that show also. And then we had the production area. It was basically Johnny Carson. He had the talk, the production area, and band area. And the stage was really nice because they had a center ramp too at the Hollywood Video Center. It was small but big enough to do production numbers. In
terms of design, is there anything that you had to be aware of in designing something for Della Reese herself, in terms of personality?
No, not really. It was mostly entertainment sets, and at that particular time we were doing 3-dimensional objects. So we were building a lot of just set pieces, 3-dimensional set pieces for the singers, basically. Yeah. And then that show led to, and then Woody did Virginia Graham. And that's where I met a lot of people. Lou Horowitz was one of our cameramen, and he's a big-time director now. So I met a lot of people. When I moved to Hollywood Video Center, it was really my first experience with stagehands. and there's another set of rules that goes along with that, Local 33, and learned a tremendous amount from Lou Tancredi and Tony DeCristo. These guys were like the ultimate stagehands. Wayne Hazelhurst, and they kind of took me under their wing and taught me a lot of stuff. What not to do and what to do, and we had a really good working relationship, and that turned into a long time association in my career later on too.
What were some of those rules that you were talking about?
Well, you're not supposed to touch anything. You can't move a chair. You can't move a glass. You can't a set piece. You could never move a set piece on stage. You would have to tell them, you want to move that one a little bit to the right, so they would kind of fake it like that, and never move it. It was a very fun relationship that we had. They taught me a lot. We kidded around a lot. There was a lot of humor involved always in all of these jobs, actually, which was kind of a neat thing to do.
And around that time, too, you were associated with KTLA.
Yes. Well, we did many shows at the Video Center. A lot of commercials. I really don't know how I got associated with KTLA. I mean, it was another show probably Z did or what I did, and we got plugged in there, and I started designing for a Detroit advertising agency, Mars Advertising in Detroit, mainly just doing sets for their commercials and stuff, and ended up designing and directing a lot of their commercials. So at KTLA there was also was basically a rental studio, and they did a lot of musical specials there. Z and I did a Super Comedy Bowl with Marty Pacetta, and I think maybe through that connection I got to know, a series called Monsanto Presents, and there was a series of 4 or 5 specials that Art Fisher directed. So this was musical stuff now, musical variety stuff I was getting involved in. An Evening with Nancy Wilson, Jose Feliciano, Pearl Bailey, Mancini, I can't think of the other one, whoever it was. But that was another whole different area, so it's every time I got another job, it was in a different area, or a different musical variety. Those are strictly musical productions, variety shows. So at that point, I didn't do a sitcom at that point. That came later on. And then through the KTLA experience, it's hard to recognize or to tell how one thing led to another. It was just working with a variety of people. And at one point I got to know Larry Yost, who is a producer, director, writer for Britannica Films. And I got to design 5 of these films, and they were this classic, like The Well of the Saints, Secret Sharer, The Crocodile, the Long Christmas Dinner, and The Tenant. And these were all films for Britannica. And there again, I did the drawing, I did the designing, the drawing, the propping, the decoration on all these sets. And a very good cinematographer, Isidore Mankowski, was the DP on these things, and it was incredible, And Lou Tancredi and Tony DeCristo, they built the sets. They had a shop at that particular time, so those connections kept on going on and on for years and years for over different productions. I think I was very fortunate to have that opportunity, to do it. And like I said, I have no idea how I got the jobs. I never solicited myself to anybody. It was an offer somebody heard about me and they interviewed, and I was lucky enough to get the job.
Was that common in the business in that sense?
I don't know. I never had an agent. I mean, I was always amazed. I was always looking over my shoulder, saying, "God, I hope they don't find out. They'll really let me do this." I don't know what the process is. It's like in my case, I consider my career the accidental career. It just kind of one thing led to another, and just it built. Worked with a lot of incredible people, and I think that's the thing. You really can't take credit for any one project. There's so many people involved, and I've had so much support over the years that as we continue this, I'll be mentioning a lot of names, as we go along. It's incredible. Set designers and decorators that I work with, and DPs and producers. It's amazing, It's just because I was never my intent to be in this business, and it just kept on building and building and building, which was kind of interesting. There was only one time in 40 years that I was out of work, and it was during it was a director's strike or the writer's strike. One of those strikes was 8-month strike, and that was the only time I was really out of work in the entire time.
Wow. Before we talk about comedies, there's a quasi-comedy, The Lost Saucer, that you worked on.
Ah, yes. Sid and Marty Krofft. And that was a connection through Z, as he was doing another show at that particular time. That was very interesting. We did a flying saucer. In fact, one of our construction guys was one of the guys that worked on the golden goose, the silver goose, the spruce goose, and that was a plane made out of plywood, and he had worked on that. It was a very difficult thing to do, a flying saucer, compound curves and stuff. And then in that show, we would go to a different planet every week. That was kind of interesting because we did a lot of contemporary stuff and futuristic things. I think that only lasted 1 season or 2 seasons. I'm not sure.
Did you work with Sid and Marty Krofft on that?
Yeah, they were the executive producers. It really didn't have that much contact. I mean, of course, you interpret the script and you do whatever. But, you didn't have daily meetings or anything like that. You would just go by whatever the script did that week. And work basically with the director. And I can't even remember who directed that show. Yeah.
Did you have budget issues? Any kind of budget concerns?
Not really. I mean, there was always a budget restraint, but my outlook on budget was that my job was to interpret the script and to provide what the script calls for. That's my job. It's somebody else's job to pay for it. If I've never really had a budget problem on anything I've ever done. And it applies to Seinfeld and all those other shows too in the future. For some reason, there's always enough money to do what's required, and never had a problem.
Let's talk about your work in primetime sitcoms. What was the first primetime sitcom that you did?
It would be Fish, Danny Arnold. There again, I think I got connected with Danny. Hollywood Video Center was right up the street on Vine, and they did Barney Miller at ABC on Vine at that time, and that's where Danny had his offices. Don't actually remember the connection that I got there with Danny, but at one point he asked me to design a rehearsal set of Barney Miller. And
what is a rehearsal set?
It was on another stage where they would go and rehearse instead of on the set where the set was where they would shoot. I don't even know why they had a rehearsal set, because they just never stopped working on Barney. It was amazing. But anyway, that led to me hanging out at Barney and seeing that whole process, which was amazing. Johnny Mueller was the art director on it at that time.
What made it amazing?
It never ended. The writing would just go on and on and on. They would keep on sending pages down. Danny was a perfectionist. Danny invented the quad system, where they would slave all 4 cameras, and that was on his nickel. He paid for that, so he didn't want to take the time we're cutting live. Sitcoms at that point were cut live in the booth. Danny did things his own way. He wanted total control, so he would slave all cameras, and he had his own editors, edited from all 4 cameras. And it was the quad system, where 4 TV sets were set up, where you could look at what every one of them was recording at that particular time. And that became a standard, basically, in sitcom world. Danny was an amazing guy. He was the last of the Cuban cigar, Rolls-Royce chauffeured producers. He was amazing. He was absolutely amazing. He also taught me a lot. When I was interviewing, he hired me to do Fish, and I was waiting outside of his office to meet and talk about fees and whatever. At that particular time, there's another interesting point. Jeff Millman was the runner, for Danny at that particular time, and he worked his way up. And I've done a lot of stuff with Jeff too in the future. So I was sitting outside of his office. The door was open. He's there on the phone with his feet up on his desk, buying 2 Rolls Royces, one for him and one for his doctor. And I'm sitting at the door. He motions me, and I'm sitting there sat down in front of his desk. And this went on maybe for 25, 30 minutes. Him buying these 2 Rolls Royces. Well, the purpose of the meeting was me to, how much was I going to get paid for that. So I learned a big lesson that day. We got talking to business, and he said, okay, what would you want? I doubled my fee. Didn't blink an eye. So I learned a lot, from that one experience, which was kind of interesting, I thought.
And what was Fish?
Fish was a spinoff of Barney Miller, Abe Vigoda. Did it with George Spiro Dee. And that was also amazing because we did. It was a stage at, I think it was 57 at ABC Prospect, 57, 59, and Danny always wanted a lot of sets, and to do all kinds of things. And we had a very limited space, and we had really no space for swing sets. So that led me to design, I think, probably the first 2-story set, where we had 4 cameras, and the 4th camera was on a crane. I mean, it was very, very unusual at the time to do something, that bizarre, because they liked unit sets and like to keep things simple. Interesting thing about that stage was, on the other side of the stage, it was Cotter. Roy was doing Cotter, and I was doing Fish on the other side of the stage, and we had an audience in between, and they would turn the audience around. So it'd be 3 days on Cotter, 3 days on Fish, and they would literally turn the audience around, which was kind of interesting.
You're referring to Roy Christopher?
Royce Christopher. Yeah. And another person that comes into my future later on, Tom Sharonis, also worked on Cotter. I really didn't know him at the time, but got to know him later.
Going back to Fish, that was a spin-off of Barney Miller.
Yeah.
And it was a very gritty kind of look to Barney Miller. Did you have to also replicate that for Fish?
Yeah, I think Fish's set also looked that way, too. Leslie Parsons was my assistant on that show, and she later became an art director herself. And we did everything, again, drawing and propping and decorating. I mean, those are the days where you did everything yourself, which was incredible. Because you learned a lot, when you had total control, and so you really appreciated what went into a show. So later on, when you had, depending on where you worked, you had to have a set decorator, and designers, and at least you understood the process, so it was nice to let go of some of those things and have other people help you out.
Around that time too, you were doing This Is the Life.
Another interesting connection, and I mean there was so many connections. There was a company in Pasadena, the Russ Reed Company, that was an advertising agency, basically doing fundraising projects for a lot of religious organizations, St. Jude Children's Hospital, World Vision International. I designed a lot of shows for Russ Reed Company. And there again, it started mainly with World Vision. I had designed the telethon set that they used for fundraising, and they really didn't like the director at that point. He didn't, for some reason, there was a bad connection there. And I got the opportunity to design and direct a lot of stuff for the World Vision, for Russ Reed Company. And that's where I got my DGA, got into the DGA. There was a series that World Vision did called Come Walk the World. And it was basically, I did tie-ins to films that they had shot in Africa. It was a stage in Hollywood that we did that. And that's how I got into the DGA. And I was doing that at the same time I was doing Fish. So that was kind of interesting. There was even an advertisement in one of the local papers that had World Vision on. It was the same panel, World Vision, and then Fish on the bottom. I still have a copy of that somewhere.
Oh, speaking of Fish, you won an Emmy Award for that design. Did you go to the ceremony?
Yes, I did. This is 1977. Yeah. So it was 76, 77. I think it only lasted one season, Fish, or 2 seasons at the max. Yeah. It was very interesting. Yeah. It was, and it was. I was lucky. I went up very early in my career, so that might have had some influence on people hiring me. I don't know.
Did you give a speech or anything when you won? Do you remember what you said?
No, I think I was just too overcome. I don't think I said anything. Do you remember?
Just said thanks, basically.
Yeah. Good Time Harry.
Good Time Harry. Charlie Jaffe, Woody Allen's producer. Another great guy. This was at Universal. There's always a problem when you do a big sitcom on a big studio set, is sight lines to the audience. So what I did was I designed the sets in a horseshoe around the stage. And in the center, I designed a rotating audience section. TV booth, 200 people audience that would rotate and face the sets as they did it. And it was a 180-foot main drape. So the drape would open to the set. It was done like theater. It would close, and they would move the audience to the next scene. The drape would open, and they would shoot that scene. It would close, and they would move it over. So it was done like theater. That audience section cost about $100,000 to do, and it was never used after that show for some reason. I don't know, but I got a nomination for that show also.
Did it work?
See, there's mechanics again. That's where I think industrial design was a big influence on how I designed sets. I looked at it from a different angle, not from a theater background, but from just a different approach. And that happened several times. I think I've innovated some techniques over the years.
Did that revolving audience work the way you anticipated it to work?
No. During, I think it was the first show, we had some problem with the air motor, and it broke down, and then we ended up physically turning the stage. It worked. After that, we got some problems worked out, but of course, the premiere time, things happen, so that was kind of interesting.
As we go into the 80s, you worked on Newhart.
Newhart, yes. Tommy Getz did the original design for the show that I did. Lucky enough to take over the show at that particular. It was done. I had my office at CBS, It was done there. Great, one of the best shows I've ever worked on because they were so prepared. They had scripts in advance. George LaFontaine was the lighting director, DP. Very good friend. We've worked many shows together after that. Bob was the kind of guy that wanted to come in and do his job and go home. So it was really well structured, that show, which was really nice. And I did that for, I think, 6 years. I'm not sure. It was a long time.
What kind of sets did you design?
There again, whatever was required. That show was fairly simple. They had maybe 1 or 2 sets. We did a golf course in one time, and we didn't have very much room on the stage. So I designed half a golf course, and I put mirrors on one end. So it looked, I even designed a half of a house and put a mirror up against so it looked like it was a whole house there. So you have to solve problems. Designing for TV sitcoms is always a space problem. So you get to be a little inventive. In that case, that one, and of course the big thing with the Seinfeld, Newhart, was the last episode.
You were there for that?
Yes, and I was. The crew didn't know what we were designing. Nobody knew, other than Bob and the other principal. So we had to camouflage the set, and it was revealed at the end. It was amazing.
Was there any problem in recreating the set from the original Bob Newhart show?
No, we had some research there at the studio that we duplicated it pretty well. It was just his bedroom, his bed set, basically.
And were you actually there when they were shooting it?
Oh yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Well, it was such a surprise to everybody that actually they had to shoot it a couple of times because there was so much commotion, laughter and whatever. But it was, one of those moments that stays with you for a long time.
Did you know it would be as historic as it was?
Well, you never really know it when you're doing it. You're hoping that nobody finds out. It's a big secret. So I knew it was going to be good, but it ended up being one of the classics.
Yeah, because there was an assumption that you have to know about the first show in order to make that work.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
Was there any fear that people had forgotten that?
No. Bob did a couple of shows. Did another show after that, even. So he was pretty. It was a pretty hot show, at that particular time.
Did you work with Bob Newhart himself?
Only indirectly. He was super nice, very businesslike. He came in, wanted to do his job. Was always very well prepared. He was funny on the set. Professional. He was a professional.
Oh, this was an MTM show.
MTM. Did a lot of shows for MTM, actually. Bernie Ozoransky was production designer, production manager, and a producer, I believe, in a lot of those shows. Yeah. So a long-time association. Being on the lot at CBS Studio Center, you got to meet a lot of people. Little production companies would come and go, and MTM was there for quite a long time. Yeah.
Where was your office located at CBS?
It was located in one of the buildings that was built in 1927. It was originally a wardrobe building. It was a small building. It's still there. And then when Al came in, and that's where the original art department was, and I think still is. Other art departments are there now. It was editing in one half of the building, I think, at that particular time. And then eventually we took over the entire building. But that took years. It evolved quite a bit over the time. But most of my career is spent in that building. Looking back was kind of neat. Yeah.
What kind of tools did you work with? What do you consider the tools of the trade for what you do?
How about a pencil? tools of the trade.
Do you have a drafting table?
Oh, of course.
Kind of thing?
It's basically, as a draftsman, it was all the drafting tools, and everything was done by hand. And I became very proficient and fast at doing drawings. Later on in the career, everything was done by computer. Speaking of CBS, I want to mention some names. The set designers, when I was a set designer, Lou Montahano, Andy Solosi. These are guys who were unbelievable. Joe Jennings was on the board at that time, became production designer. But we had a lot of people going through the art department, like Michael Baugh, for instance, big time production designer later on. It's a lot of people came and went through the art department. So it was an opportunity to meet a tremendous amount of people and learn different things from different people, which was really my education. It was incredible. And that's what gave me the tools to go on, to do other things. And there's another quote too. Is probably one of my best pieces of motivation. Is a quote from Mark Twain. He says, "All you need is ignorance and confidence to succeed in life." I think I paraphrased that somewhat. And it's true, ignorance and confidence. Because I was ignorant about everything that I've ever done. You learned, and you just took the chance and went for it, Had the confidence enough to know that you were going to do the job.
Is there anything you ever turned down because you didn't have the confidence?
No. No, I don't think so. I was always amazed that they hired me, period.
Okay, let's talk about a few more shows that you were on, starting with Night Court.
Night Court. Reinhold Weege, and then Jeff Millman, of course. All these are all Barney people. Came from Barney Miller. That was a really interesting show. The basic designer, in fact, my brother and I worked on that show. My brother was my assistant on that show. I designed the set. It was a Night Court, and I did the basic drawings, and we were actually building the set, the courtroom itself, and it was just primed gray. And I said, I decided that was the color it was going to be, gray. It was perfect because there was so much color in the characters. And I called Riney and I think Jimmy Burrows at that time directed that show, to bring them down to see the set in that condition. And it took them a while to agree with me about the color. And I have a philosophy, a color philosophy is designing sets, that it should never overpower, actors. It should always be in the background, sets, unless you're designing for Pee Wee Herman, where the set is the character itself. So they agreed, and we agreed to put color into the woodwork, the judge's bench, and the audience section, and so there was wood color with the gray. And basically that worked well because the characters were so colorful that you didn't want to take any attention away.
Do you remember what the color that was spec'd was?
The what was?
The color that was originally spec'd that didn't get used. Do you remember what color they wanted?
No, I chose the color. I didn't get to the...
Oh, it hadn't been chosen yet?
No. I mean, I was in a process of choosing colors, and I decided that gray is what it should be. So yeah, bring them down and get that approved. And the other thing about Night Court too is we designed the glass box, and this is also George Deby, the cafeteria, and this was another example of breaking away from the norm of television production, sitcom production. Is there was a lot of interior corridors, and the cafeteria itself was a glass box, literally, with neon. You never use neon. You never use neon. And DB, he says, we can do anything sexy. That was his philosophy. That we can do anything. And that was the main philosophy with fish. talking about the second story sets in the meeting with Danny. He says, "Don't worry, sexy. We can do anything." You know, and that's a big motivating thing. You know, is having the support of knowing that literally you can do anything.
Well, going back to research, did you do any research for that set for Night Court?
Not really. You know, it's life experience. You know, not that I've been in court that much, but it's what you do is you design for the action. You know what a courtroom looks like. You know what it should contain: judge's bench, jury box, and audience section, viewing section. I mean, so you have basic ideas of what these things are, should be. What you always try to do is always, when designing a set, not only is it a visual representation of the script, what you want to do is add something that the director can do. So basically what you're doing when you design a sitcom set is you're directing it for the first time. Because you're putting the entrances and exits where you think they should go. So what you do is you figure all of that in the design process. And then what you do is you build a model, and then you go sell the idea to the director and the producer. And that is the part I liked the best, was presentation, was selling your concept. It was always great fun. And that's a lot of things I had a lot of fun with, too, later on in my career, too, with SeaWorld and a lot of other projects where you would have to walk into a room with, 15 people and present your project, so. And that's what basically industrial design is. You're designing a product, and not only you have to design it, but you have to sell it, So that was one of the fun parts of being a designer. And I actually prefer the terms designer as opposed to production designer. A designer can do anything.
Let's stop there and take a quick break.